Hi, everyone. Good morning. Hi, everyone. Good morning. We're going to get started with the next CA. So if you want, just get settled in, take a seat. We'll be closing the door soon. All right. So thanks again for joining us at the 2024 Sloan Sports Analytics Conference, Competitive Advantage Talks, presented by Kager, also known as the Craft Analytic Group. My name is Esteban Calderon, and I'm a first-year MBA student at MIT Sloan. It is my pleasure to introduce a presentation of AI at the Paris 2024 Olympics, using GenAI to supercharge analytics and reach new audiences. Please join me in welcoming our speaker, Chris Jackson, Head of Digital Data and Analytics at the Olympics, to the stage.
Good morning. Thank you for the introduction, and great to be here. It's always a little bit worrying as a Brit to be in Boston. I've got a little bit of tea in my back pocket. Don't tell anyone. They can take the rest. It's okay. So I'm responsible for a lot of the data and analytics around what we do from one Olympics to the next. So we have Olympics.com. We have the Olympics presence on social media, associated apps, and I'm part of a broader organisation out of Madrid, Olympic Broadcast Services, Olympic Channel Services, which is responsible for all of that, plus the broadcasting across all of the different editions of the Olympics. So I've done a bunch of things before. I did a good amount of time in strategy and classic analytics. I also, back in the late 90s, did some early work on neural networks and the very first parts of deep learning. So for me, this is a super exciting moment to potentially bring together analytics with some of these new techniques, and I think there's a lot of things we can do. What I'm hoping to do today is just to take you through a recipe that we've come up with to navigate some of this complexity. And I'd love to understand, maybe in the questions, if that's useful for you, if you found a different approach. I think we're all in this together, right? Trying to figure out, with this amazing opportunity of generative AI, how the hell we use it to do something super useful. Okay, so let's get started. Hands up if you've heard of the Olympics. All right. Probably a bit too early for a really stupid joke, but I think it's fair to say that awareness is not our issue. In fact, the Olympics, in terms of an event, may be even bigger than you think it is. The best way into this, from my perspective, is there are 48 different disciplines, different sports that are played in a Summer Olympics, or at least there will be in Paris. For most of those sports, it's the single biggest event in their calendar. So we're running the equivalent of 48 World Championships. That's huge in terms of complexity, and obviously billions of people and an awful lot are watching. A lot of people are involved. From a digital perspective, we have somewhere between 200 and maybe up to 50% more than that during a Summer Olympics on our website, on Olympics.com. We think that makes it the biggest website of any sports organisation. There's bigger sports media sites, but from a league or from a team. If that's wrong, it would help me for my benchmarking, so let me know afterwards. We've got around 120 million followers on social media. We're obviously across an awful lot of countries. From a data perspective, it's amazing. I mean, the data set is just incredible for fan engagement. If we start with what's happening in the sport, during the Olympics, there's a real-time feed, play-by-play, of what's occurring. We've got that going back to 2010, to Vancouver Winter Olympics. So we know across all of those 48 events in a summer sport, moment by moment, what's happening. Since Tokyo, we've been collecting, for this 200 million plus audience, how people are interacting with that as well. So that's a couple billion data points of how audiences are caring about these different moments. So our opportunity is to put that together, and honestly, we've only just got started, and we think generative AI may be useful. I want to give you just a sense of the data. This is not during the Olympics. This is a couple of days ago in the morning. Each of these squares represents page views by sport and by country. USA is in the top right there. That's that little section For most of the time, I'll step back, maybe that will help a little bit. For most of the time that we are operating, we're really dominated by big population markets like Japan, USA for sure, Brazil, India is huge for us, so it's strikingly international, the number of countries that are represented and also the number of sports. Football's pretty big at this particular moment, but so is artistic gymnastics, so are a bunch of other sports on there. So just a sense of what's happening real time. So across our digital and our broadcast organizations, there's sort of three big challenges that we're trying to tackle at scale. Yes, data and analytics, I can talk to you about that for hours, but that's only one. Content creation is very important, whether broadcast or digital content. We're putting a lot of resource, as you can imagine, into covering each of those different sports in a really good way that works for broadcasters around the world that we partner with to provide them with the content, and also with a bunch of other digital organizations to handle that. Not to be forgotten is that middle bit, the boring bit. You know, we're talking about tens of thousands of people in a workforce. You have to be flown to the game city, you have to have a hotel booked, have to have a flight rerouted when those things go wrong. You need catering, need dietaries, da-da-da-da-da. Not very exciting, perhaps, but there's a lot of work in it. So those are the three areas where, going into this, we thought we might be able to do something with generative AI. This is our problem. Typically, an Olympics takes 7 years to organize. LA has 11. Brisbane 2034 has 13 years. So these are long gestation projects, as you would expect. In 6 months, you can do a lot with AI. But you can imagine the conversation I was having with the lawyers this morning when I woke up, where they're saying, are you sure you're going to get all this stuff done in time for the Paris Olympics? Because most projects are, 3-4 years further advanced at this point. So just making it work in an extremely tight timescale is a challenge. Hopefully that's relevant because I guess a number of people are thinking, how can I too deliver quick capability with AI, given all of the complexities that are around right now? And let's double click on those complexities. So the opportunities are clear. There's things we can possibly do faster. There's things we can be more efficient at. I'm kind of excited by new capabilities, by things that we perhaps couldn't do before. There's a lot of opportunities. But our organization is frightened, and I'm guessing lots of your organizations are too, by things which might lead to a lack of accuracy, to bias, to an unclear IP situation. They're very important for us, and most sports organizations are founded on fairness, on making sure that you've got a really good relationship, particularly with the fans, and also on a rights situation. This is where a lot of sports are funded. So for us, any compromise in those three areas is a problem. And maybe we can shift a little bit in some areas and take some risks. People don't get all these things right either, but we probably can't shift that much right now. So, this is probably how I felt around New Year's. I was trying to enjoy the party, but I was sitting back and thinking, well, we really, really need to do something on this for Paris. That means it needs to be production ready in July. And honestly, if it's not ready at the end of May, I'm going to be worried. And how the hell do we navigate all of these complexities? So let me take you through how we're navigating it so far. It's very much work in progress. And again, we'd love to hear your feedback and thoughts. So first of all, we zeroed in on content creation. We're forgetting the rest for now. There's a couple of reasons for this. First of all, we spend a lot of money on it. And secondly, I think it's fair to say this is where the tools are probably best suited right now. These generative AI systems are great at creating content. Well, they have the potential to be great at creating content. But, if we just started writing articles, creating video with generative AI, I think we would create ourselves an absolute world of pain. There's people who think that's probably what we should do. I suspect every single one of those risks will get ticked off if we weren't very careful about how we do it. So this is the approach we've happened upon, and I'm going to take you through this step by step with a series of sort of mini case studies of what we've been working on. And I think there's some interesting points that come out of it. So, first, we start simple. And this sort of, given these things are complicated and you can do great stuff, and we've all gone in and had them write emails for us when we didn't want to write the email or do some relatively complicated task, it's tempting to start complicated. But what we did is pull back and did the simplest thing we could think of, which was simply to classify content. We write a bunch of articles, about 300 a week. We asked the person writing it to click in on what sport, what country, what athletes, and a bunch of other tags, metadata about that. It takes them about 10 minutes to do it. There's a bunch of tools out there which can do this for you automatically. None of them have worked for us. And we've tried conventional machine learning approaches and abandoned it. So we just went at that task that we understand well. And honestly, it went really, really good. I mean, we were shocked by how much better the results were, but notably how a couple of weeks of quite careful effort, because we were worried at that point, already got us to a good outcome. So the lesson we learned is you can have immediate impact if you pick a small task, the right small task, and work on it. Let me show you some data on how that worked. It's a little bit small up on the screen here, but this is accuracy. So the percentage of tags that were correct according to what the editors say. And bear in mind the editors aren't always right, and sometimes they don't finish their job because they want to just publish. So sometimes it just goes out. So in blue, OpenAI's GPT 3.5, GPT-4, similar results actually. Llama 2, this is an open source model from Meta, and then Claude is from Anthropic, the OpenAI spin-off or separatist movement. All very strong models. So OpenAI generally performed better. That blue bar is generally above, but don't rule out the other ones for a simple task. All this to say, in our experience so far, and for simple tasks, the models are relatively similar. Actually, the big difference was in Japanese. We're using OpenAI mainly for what we do right now because it performs well outside of English. I don't know how important Japanese is to a bunch of you. It's very important to us, but we might be in a minority. But what I would take away from that is if your task is kind of obscure, you probably want to use the more fancy models because they're trained more thoroughly on a bigger amount of data. If your task is simple, if you're just trying to work out sport from a bunch of English articles, you can use whichever model, and it can be very cheap and very efficient, and whichever partner you've got is going to work well for you. Something's important from a sports marketing world. Okay, so having done a simple thing, then what we said is we really want to superpower our editors here. We want to give them the ability to write better content faster. How do we do that? So at the start of the year, a little bit in the fireplace, we said, let's take January and see what we can do. We had an event called the Youth Winter Olympics in Gangwon, South Korea. So a bunch of us flew over there, and it was just a great test bed to work with people on a small thing and try it out. So during the course of only a few weeks, we created 6 different agents, which do stuff like analyze the article, look it up versus SEO recommendations, and tell the editor, hey, people want to know about this athlete's nutrition, or they want to know about this athlete's training regime. You haven't written anything on that, why don't you add that in? And we've got a bunch of quite interesting results from people just getting that feedback in real time. We also then started doing it against our network of content and grabbing paragraphs, so saying, you should write about nutrition. Here's a bunch of stuff we've written about nutrition before that's pretty safe content that you can include. I won't go through all the different agents, but you get the idea. A bunch of, if you like, co-pilot tools for an editor. What we found without question is these worked well when we applied our own data. We've got a huge database of articles. We've got, as I talked about, quite an interesting data set of how people interact. We've got access to all the usual SEO tools, trends tools, social listening tools. If you add that extra data in, you get a better result. Or to put it in the lawyer's terms, this is something I can agree to you using. So that for us is absolutely crucial to add the data in, and I can't stress this highly enough. And as someone who's got a bunch of data science background, that's quite exciting as well, because it suggests that quite a lot of those skills that come from data science or classic analytics are highly appropriate to shipping real applications with this new technology. Okay, third bit, because that to me is exciting, but there's nothing to stop an editor from going and looking in the SEO tool and getting those recommendations themselves. I think we've done it better and easier, and they're using it more as a result. But really, this is just speeding things up. So how do we get to something new? And we racked our brains on that a little bit. We've also spoken to a bunch of people, including OpenAI themselves, and said, a thing that I was thinking about in December, and perhaps a lot of people are, which is, how do we put all of our information into this thing you've built so that it can do a better job and doesn't make a bunch of those mistakes that we've seen previously? In other words, how do we create something new? And OpenAI have been very patient with us and have sat quietly and explained things quite slowly sometimes, which is kind of them. They're really nice and smart people. And what I think with their help we've come to the conclusion of is often it's just a case of scaling up. So take those same simple tasks, which you've superpowered with data, and do a lot more of them, because these aren't people anymore. These queries, maybe they're costing 10 cents, maybe even $1 for a complicated one per thing. But if it's a valuable area, you can afford to do 1,000 of those relatively straightforwardly. So take that example of looking at articles, for example, and understanding what you should add. Then what we started doing is doing it across our full data set. So looking across all of the trends that are important for all of our priority athletes, and it's a big list internationally, for all of the content we've already written, and giving the head editorial staff a wish list. You know, this athlete, you've got great content on them, but you've never written about the details of how they got to who they are today. You've never written about some of their mental health struggles, which is something that people are searching for. So that's the state of the art of what we've got live right now, is rather than editors thinking, right, you know, what is my gut as to what's needed, they're augmenting that, not replacing, but augmenting with this automatic capability. And because it's at massive scale, it's adding something which they genuinely couldn't do before, or at least they'd be guessing at. And they probably get right for the key sports in the key countries, but perhaps not everywhere. Classic example for us, for example, is curling in the US. Our editor is really knowledgeable about Olympics in the US. I've never met anyone. I know there's a lot of strong Olympics fans in this country. I've never met anyone who knows as much as they do. But they insisted curling wasn't a huge priority. And believe me, curling does very well in the US. And so, you know, those are blind spots that we can sometimes have in the markets we know really well. Malaysia is huge for us. The Philippines is huge for us during the Olympics. No one on our team knows deeply about those markets, but this can help us to dive into that and understand. So let me recap, and I'd love your feedback about whether this is a recipe that might work. In very simple terms, start simple. You can already deliver value. It may not be super exciting, but you'll learn what can and can't be done and get people, even the lawyers, comfortable with some of these things you're looking at. Step 2, add data, because that's what's going to allow you to safely do more stuff. You can dangerously do lots of things, but you can safely do it if you add data. And then third, just scale it up, just do a lot more of it where it's useful, so that instead of going through step by step as you would have done manually, imagine what you'd do if you had 1,000 people dedicated to this task who are absolutely reliable. And that's what you've got there. So that's our recipe, and that's kind of where we're at right now. Well, at least it was when I wrote the slides. I wrote this one as what happens next, but this is big on our Slack channels right now. Whether in the one with OpenAI in it, or the ones that are collaborating with the lawyers, or the ones where the data scientists and the engineers are racking their brains. Obviously, this stuff we've already built, this scope to keep iterating and keep iterating. And by the way, the iteration is fast here. It said it in the slides, but I haven't underlined it. You know, previously we'd be lucky to get minor iterations of stuff out in 2 weeks, that kind of 2-week development cycle that a lot of organizations have. During January, when we were doing these kind of fast experiments, we'd be shipping several times a week, on some areas perhaps every day, to put it in front of someone, ask for their feedback, and then it's pretty quick to improve it, because it's a prompt and some data. It's not a bunch of code that needs to be QA'd and improved, and all that stuff we're used to when shipping digital products. So we'll obviously keep on iterating that. I mentioned at the start this kind of real-time data feeds we've got, and I showed you some of that 20-second updates. So we think triggering this stuff real-time is going to be very valuable for the Olympics. And that allows us to really get a lot closer to our holy grail, which is better storytelling of the right stories immediately. So what we're working on right now is when that thing happens, and when 20 seconds later we get how people are responding to it across those hundreds of millions of users on our site, how do we very quickly work out if this is a thing that we should be covering, regardless of whether it's US or a medium-sized market that's probably historically been an area we know less about. So that's what we're working on right now, and we're really super excited by it. And I hope to come back next year, or perhaps someone who knows more than me will come back and tell you more about it. If you'll allow me, I don't know how we're doing for time, probably quite good. Yeah. If you'll allow me, just one final thought. Up until the start of this year, as I said, I was thinking of this thing kind of as a black box. And I think that's how we're encouraged to think about it when we're using ChatGPT in a browser or a Copilot in a Microsoft tool or the GPT app or whatever. I was thinking of it as a black box, and you use this thing and it can do some stuff and it can't do others. I'm sure we've all got our pet examples of the inconsistent answers, the inaccurate answers, and so on and so forth. And my question was, how do I make the black box do what we need it to do safely? I think that's the wrong mindset, and this is kind of how we're thinking about it now, which is to say that in order to do any useful task in life, not with generative AI, there's a number of steps. If you were building an organization of people to get a thing done, you'd be thinking about what the different teams' roles were, how they interacted, and how stuff fed from one team to the other. And I think that's how you should think about AI at the moment. Maybe it will change in the future, but for the next couple of years, let's see if I still think this in the conference next year. For the next couple of years, I think it's more a case of saying, right, we've got to have a process that classifies. We've got to have a process that goes and grabs more information. We've got to have a process that summarizes. We've got to have a process that checks. Is this good? Is it ready to be shown, or should we put this somewhere else for someone to check what happened here? And I think if you start thinking of AI like that, as doing a lot of different tasks, and if you can orchestrate them in the right way, then you can build really powerful capabilities without too many risks being introduced. So that's all I've got. Thank you very much. Would welcome any questions.
Hey, thank you, Chris. Henry from Amazon GenAI Innovation Center.
Hi.
Appreciate you sharing the insights and definitely echo a lot of things you are seeing across. One quick follow-up on the third process of continuous monitoring of these trends. Curious if you can articulate a little more into how are you guys doing that? Are you using it manually? Are you using ChatGPT to help you summarize some of these trends? Or?
Yeah.
And when you mentioned about updating 15 plus models, are you talking about new capabilities, or are you talking about updating some of the prompts that's already existing? Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. So actually I kept away from the tech stuff, but we're very much an AWS shop. So a lot of the plumbing around this is AWS components. A lot of our team are working in SageMaker that some of you may have heard of, which is like the data science tool set. So that plumbing is super important to be able to do this. I just didn't think it was the thing to dive into for this audience. But there's my AWS ad to add to the other stuff. And actually, not the OpenAI models, but all the other ones we mentioned you can use on AWS as well. So to get into the questions, first of all, you were talking about how we do it in real time, and then a little bit about how many models there are. So I'll cover the second one first. Generally, what we're doing is building about 15 components and making them better and better and better. And a lot of that is by evaluating, seeing where a problem happens. AWS has a great tool called Augmented AI, which we use for this. And then when you understand how it works, you go back and loop. So it's less, I think, about creating more models, although we will. It's more about, essentially, a prompt that's linked up to a set of data, which does a thing in a black box. And having 15, 20 of those is, I think, kind of the level that we need to be at. In terms of how we do real time, let me explain it kind of business-wise, and then we explain it technical for anyone interested. So business-wise, essentially what we've got is a stream of what's happening and a stream of how people are interacting. And because our site is huge, generally if someone is searching on Google and they're really passionate, and their question is, okay, I've heard that my country's about to win a gold medal, when's that on the TV? And, who is this athlete that I've never heard of that's about to win in the dressage, some obscure sport? These are the sorts of questions generally people are landing on our site. So we've got that click information. Business-wise, there's two challenges. First of all, what's the business logic to join those up? So how do you determine this page view is to this event? That's something we've been working on for a couple of years anyway. And then afterwards, it's just a case of then processing that and saying, here's a moment, let's compare it to previous moments and how big they were, and decide how big a moment we think that's going to be. So technically, this requires a bunch of real-time processing, a bunch of queues, essentially, which takes all that information, and in seconds, ideally milliseconds, already processes it and works it through, which is very different from working back on past Olympics. So that's our technical challenge to make all of that stuff work.
Hello, my name is Richard from Ernst & Young. Thank you very much for this talk. My question was more about the first part of your presentation, about using data to better get prepared for next events. With Olympics happening every 4 years and winter every 2 years if we count them, but with different sports, how do you think an event can prepare using past data with context being so different? And do you think AI can help you bridge that gap of always adjusting context. For example, Tokyo is not the same context as Paris. It's not the same context as LA with all those time difference. Can you talk about adjusting data for those periods?
Yeah,
Thank you.
absolutely. And it's top of mind for us. And, you know, the 2 Olympics where we've really done a full-scale data analytics operation were Tokyo, which is supposed to happen in 2020 and then got delayed and was, I can tell you from having been there, a wild ride. And we thought we'd been through the worst of it, and then we all showed up in Beijing, and there was everyone covered top to toe in white suits because we were the people from outside of China. So both of those Olympics were particularly exceptional. If we talk in a classic analytics sense, we have been able to predict pretty accurately. We've generally been able to get the days right, so knowing how big a different day is going to be in terms of both unique users and then down funnel in terms of engagement. We've got a sort of 60% record in terms of sports and countries then, because it does depend hugely on sporting performance. That's kind of the main differentiator. You know, if a team does well in a sport, I mean, to give you an example from the Youth Winter Olympics, Czechia, in their mythology is the time in Nagano that they beat the US in hockey. I'm sorry to come with this example. So that is huge for them. Literally, they watch our film about that triumphant moment every Christmas. And Czechia was in the semi-finals, and then they were going to be in the finals against the USA. We couldn't predict that. That was a significant boost in quite a small country, but I think the whole country was on our website checking that out. So that's the bit we can't predict. So what we hope is this will help us to get closer to that in terms of sporting performance, because we think that we can go to a further level of granularity, and generally it's not been possible when training neural networks ourselves, as we've tried in the past, to get to that, because it's just a bit hard to build it up. These models won't get retrained, but what they will do is have a database that's updated every 20 seconds, which talks about what the key things are. So then you can do that comparison, and we're hopeful, but that's the challenge.
Hey, Chris.
Hey.
This is Chris as well. My question for you is that with your audience engagement and the numbers that you showed in terms of who's on your site, are you doing anything in advance of the actual performances to create audience engagement, awareness in countries? And are you looking at any type of demographic breakdown? Because we know in winter sports, you know, the X Games sort of that have come attract a younger audience. Can you talk a little bit about your audience segment and how you're looking at trying to create interest in advance of the games?
Yeah, I mean, it's a key issue. For those who are involved with the Olympic movement, as I know you are, you may be aware of the initiative that Olympics.com grew out of, which we called Olympic Channel, and that was a channel on cable in a number of different countries, in the first iteration of doing what we call flame to flame. So after the flame goes out, how are you still engaging people? That's been an ongoing effort for about 6 years now, and it's showing really, really good results. We're actually ahead of our target to 26 right now for just that ongoing involvement. And I won't talk about specific figures, but when we benchmark ourselves against major sports, so soccer, but also NFL, NBA, etc. In most months, Olympics.com is ahead of those properties in terms of unique users. So that's going good. Now, you asked a very important question about new audiences and broadening out. And I'd look at that in 2 different areas. One is that international perspective of taking the audiences, the Olympics to different audiences. Our first attempt of this was Japan, starting off in 2018, ahead of their Olympics. We had a pretty low audience in Japan, and with a localized team based out of Tokyo, we've built an extremely strong audience, actually a general sporting audience, which we're then able to use when the Olympics comes around because we're already authoritative in Google and through other sources for that. We then took that on to India and Brazil, and you can see some of the results there in terms of country. In terms of demographics, it's interesting. The Olympics is generally around about most sports organisations in terms of age profile, a little bit better in terms of gender equality of audiences. Obviously, a lot of sports can be quite male skewed, and we're doing a little bit better on that. There are brands that are doing better than us, but generally not in sports, generally sort of broader brands. And it's a constant push for us. We're doing a lot of those things on our own site, and we're also doing it on social media. So if you look at TikTok and our performance there, if you look at Instagram, which just about still a youth platform, I think, we've seen incredibly strong growth in the last 2 years, so that's hopeful. Our aim then is to grow that into a deeper engagement, so not just a consumption of a piece of content that fits within a general sporting interest, but getting a subset of those audiences through onto our more interactive platforms on the web and app, where we can provide them with a really good experience, with original content and so forth. It's a work in progress, but we're cautiously optimistic.
Thank you very much. I think we're up, so please help me join in our round of applause.
Thank you very much. And I'd love it if you've got thoughts to share. Just come grab me afterwards. I want to hear your thoughts as well. Thank you, Esteban.